forms. The examples here, you can have a username field, you can have a password field, you can have a large text field, like, you know, looking at your email. If I were to create a new message, well, this big area that I can type a bunch of text, that is a big text box. So it's a large text field. There's drop-down lists, there's checkboxes, and just so much more. All of these are fields. I click on the attached drop-down, and these are options, but that is still code that somebody created so that there is a drop-down. And you know, these buttons, these circles here, those are options, or really they're checkboxes because you can do multiple ones, but they're just circles instead of squares like normal. So yeah, so many things that you can do with forms. And this chapter doesn't cover a lot of them, so I'm actually going to cover more of them that's not even in the chapter later on. Okay, so just like when you create something, kind of like again, you know, you have your HTML tags, you have your head, you have your body. And just like we were creating tables, you know, you have an open table, and then you have a closed table tag. Well, very similarly, you have form tags. Now, here's a bunch of other stuff that you can put in forms, but I'm not going to do that yet. I'm just going to create form tags. Okay, so now I have a form. Let me go ahead and save and refresh just so we can see what it looks like. So I saved it in downloads, 1311, and my file name is called forms. Okay. Okay, so here is a web page here of my file named forms. Well, there's nothing on it. And even if I were to go on here, you notice that all I have is a form, but it doesn't have any content in it. But let me go ahead and just put something up here. Let me put a H1 is my form. So that's a heading. So I'm going to go ahead and save and then refresh. So now I have, this is my form. But again, you don't actually see that it is a form until you add an input field. Well, let's go ahead and look at that. Now I'm going to show you a bit about all of these here. These are attributes that you can add to the form so that you can actually do stuff with it. But for now, we just have form, and I'll expand on that later. But to discuss it, name and ID, these two right here, basically they are just the way that we will refer to this particular form. You can have multiple forms on a web page, but we won't be doing that in this assignment. We'll only have one set of form fields. Okay, so again, name and ID are basically just to refer to this form. And an example of referring to the form would be like, let's say you had a cascading style sheet. You wanted to format this form so that it had a blue background or something. So you can create cascading style sheets to say, okay, the form that is named my form has a blue background. So that's just an example of how you would use this name and ID. And we'll look at that later. I know that we haven't done cascading style sheets yet. Okay, so it's how we refer to the form in our code. Action. Now this is a good time for you to try to remember what these things are for, because it could be hard to determine the difference. But the action, you want to think about where the page should send the information. So here's action right here. So where is it going to send the information? Is it going to send it to an email, or is it going to send it to a database where you store all your actual email message information? Or are you just going to email the information to yourself or to your customer or whatever? So again, action is where you're going to send the information. Method is how you're going to send the information. And a good way to remember this is that, think about, well, how do you define method? What is your method of creating a web page? Or what is your method of solving a problem? How are you going to solve the problem? Well, that's the method. And the two options for sending information is the get and the post commands or values for the method attribute. Okay. All right, so now we're going to cover the get and the post attributes, or well, values, the method attributes, and then the get and the post are the values of method. All right, so get is how we're going to send the information. Well, the thing to remember about get is that when you use the get, the information is displayed, which is very important to remember, because when the information is displayed, that means that it is in private, and people can see it. And what you don't want people to see, your passwords or your social, that kind of information. So when you have a field, like let's say, if you're applying for financial aid, they're going to request your social security number. Do you want your social security number to be displayed on the screen? No, we do not. And a good example would be is if you are, when you do a search, and I'm going to go to Google. If you do a search in Google, let me say I'm going to search for cats. When you do a search, notice on the very top, okay, no, maybe there was just too many options for cats. That's funny. But within here, you should actually see the word cats. And there are different search engines, and I actually just tried Bing. So let me try searching for personality with Bing. Now here we go. This is a good example. Notice how up here in the URL, it actually has what I entered in the field. See, and all these different codes are, just different things that they wanted to save for whatever reason. But that's a good example of the command. The get command shows whatever is in the input field. So we do not want to put something that's like a password or confidential. We actually want to choose the post method. Now remember again, there's action and then there's method. The two options for method is get and post. Get is not private and post is private. Be sure to remember that. Okay, so just like I said, and it says right here, an easy way to remember is that the user gets to see the information that was sent. So when I did a search here using Bing, the user gets to see what I searched for. And just search angels. Okay, Los Angeles. Okay, so here's angels. The user gets to see what was searched for. Okay. Okay, the results will appear on the address bar on the top. And a benefit to that is that you can actually bookmark it. Let's say you did a search and, or let's say I did a search on something about HTML and I wanted you all to see the results. I can actually copy the URL in the web page and send it to you all so you can see the exact search that I did and see the results that I did. So that is a benefit. Okay. And just here's it's just what they said about doing a search. Okay, so that's get. And again, you get to see what you searched for. Post, on the other hand, it's private, and that's when you want to use the post method for passwords or anything confidential that you want to enter in a field. It's sent to the server in the background. Okay, and basically the opposite of get, this kind of information is lost when you leave the page. You can't bookmark it or that kind of thing. So think about your bank account, or even like logging into ACES. When you log into ACES, it doesn't actually say up here on the URL, it still says aces.alamo.edu. It doesn't say my username and my password up here. Okay. So form fields. So we've talked about your general form tags. Here's form, open, and close. Okay, well, you need to have stuff in your form. So, we're talking about, again, there's a text box, there's email boxes, there's check boxes, drop-down lists, and all those kinds of things. So many things that we can have in there. And then, of course, buttons as well. Something needs to tell the web page that there's going to be an action happening, and of course, what method. Okay, so it mentions here that there's a text box, and that's your general input box, and it's just a matter of typing input. So let me go ahead and do that. So I already have a form here, and again, I just kind of want to come back and remind you about indentations. Remember that we need to indent, so everything inside the HTML tags are indented, everything inside the body, and I don't have my H1 indented, so let's do that. And then we have your form tags, where everything inside of your form tags needs to be indented further. Now I know that one of the past assignments, I didn't take off points for indentations, but I did bring it back. So be sure you do indentations. It is part of your grade. Anyway, so input fields. So we can do input. Oh, and that's it. If you notice here, there is no close input tag. There is at the very end a slash and an angle bracket, or you can just do input, but it is preferred that you do the slash and then the angle bracket, so that way you know that it's only that one field. So I'm going to go ahead and save and refresh, and now let's see what we have on our page. Woohoo! Here's a square, and it is an input field. Okay, well, it really doesn't do much, and notice how there's nothing right before it that says what you want in there. Also notice that there is no button, so it's like, well, after you input something into that field, well, what happens? Well, and there's so many different things that you can do. It's not like just because you don't have a button, nothing can happen. Things can still happen, but we're not going to cover that now. But we do have an input box just because I have input here. Now, to tell the user what you want them to input, well, you would put like a label at the beginning. Now, there are label tags, but the text doesn't cover that, so I'm not going to require that. If you go into the assignment, you'll see that you'll see that it says, so you're going to create a name input box, and then you're going to add a label. Well, label is just what I did there. I typed in name, that's the label, and then there's an input box. So just keep that in mind. There's no, well, I'm not going to require the code to do the label because it's not in the text. So again, when you do your assignment, just type in text so they know what to write in that input field. So I'm going to go ahead and save and refresh. And now we have name before that input field. So now somebody knows that they just put their name there. Okay. And that's your very basic stuff. Now, that's not going to be sufficient for the assignment, but I just want to kind of give you a little head start that, you know, this is still your very basics of the form. It's not really going to do much at this point. Okay, so one thing that that's mentioned right here is they start off with the autofocus attribute. Now the autofocus, and keep in mind that there's different ways of doing things. So it's talking about the autofocus, and notice how right here it just says autofocus. It doesn't say something like placeholder equals and then something in quotes. It just says autofocus. And what autofocus is basically, remember I just created a page, and actually let me refresh. Notice how the cursor isn't in here. The user actually, if I were to start typing, nothing happens. The user has to click in there to actually start typing. So if you were to add the autofocus, then the web page would know to go ahead and put that cursor in that particular box. Now, it could be in any box that you choose, but I'm going to put it in the name box because that's all I have right now. So I save, I refresh, and now the cursor's in there. So the user doesn't need to click there first. It's already there, and you just type in whatever. So there, that's the autofocus. Okay. So what's next? Placeholder. Okay, well, the placeholder basically has, think about any forms that you fill out. Have you ever filled out a form where it actually told you what to put in there in the form? It actually said, enter your name here, something like that. Well, that is the placeholder. So in your input field, and it could be before or after, and actually this slash right here, even though it doesn't have a space right before it, you really need to have a space there right before the slash in the close angle bracket. Okay, so going back to the placeholder, you can put these things in any order. Notice how it has input and then type equals text, placeholder equals this, autofocus, name, you know, it could be in any order. So that's not too big of a deal. I mean, it would make sense that the name would be at the very beginning, but it's not necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and put the placeholder. And I am just going to say meow because that's uncommon. Just so you can see that whatever I type here is what comes up in the form when I refresh it. So there it is. I have your autofocus, so it has the cursor there. And then the placeholder says meow. So it tells the user what to put in there. And I'm just going to put my name. Well, let me go ahead and put enter. I'll misspell it just because to make it obvious. So I refreshed and it says enter your name. There. Very cool stuff. Okay, so that's your placeholder. It tells the user what to enter in that field. Okay, and what's really cool about HTML5, the most recent version, and well, this wasn't, it didn't exist before, but it's so helpful that HTML5 has validation. And as it mentions here, traditionally, remember again that I said when you create a form, you're going to have some action that tells you, and here's the action here, it tells you whether when they hit submit, is it going to be sent in an email? Or is it going to be sent to a database that verifies your login information and then pulls out your emails? What's the action that's going to happen? Well, in the situation where you enter, let's say, your login information, it gets sent to the database and then it gets verified. Well, let's say that the login information should have been an email address. Well, traditionally or previously, you would type in something, let's say you didn't realize that it had to be an email address, so you just did some sort of username. When you hit submit, that information would go over the internet to, let's say, the bank's server, and then that server searched its database and looked for the username or the email, but you did it wrong. You didn't type in an email, you just typed in your name. Well, then you get an error. Then it has to come all the way back through the server, through the internet, back to your PC to say it's wrong. And all that time, it's all that work, all that processing was done. Whereas, HTML5 has the validation right there on the page. So even before you can click submit, but when you hit submit, it actually validates to make sure that it's the right format. So it does have the @ sign. It does have content after the @ sign. So it's really great having the option of validation because, you're saving a lot of processing. Another approach that they did was using JavaScript also, but yeah, we don't even need to do that either. It still did server work. So then the question is, well, how do you do a field so that it does validation? Now, just like I did my field here, I just typed an input. And actually, let me go ahead and remove this placeholder and autofocus just because I want to have a completely plain web page and code. So again, all we have is name and input. And remember, we have your open and close form tags. Since I'm here, I want to make sure that you realize that we only want one form open and close tags. Again, you can have multiple forms in a web page typically. But for this assignment, you want only one set. And it's very important because when you create the button in here, if you have different form tags, the button that you click will only affect the code with that button. So let's say you had a bunch of form tags like this. So I have 3 here. 1, 2, 3. Now, if I had the name here, and then I had, let's say, address here, and then here I had email, if I had the button here, and there's, well, the button tag actually has open and close. If I had a button here and I clicked that button, it would only send the information within this one form. If you had a button there and then a button there, and you click this button, it would only send this information. So it's very, very important that at least in this assignment, you only want one set of form tags. You want the open form and the closed form, and then everything inside of it. So since I did this, let me go ahead and save and refresh and just show you what it looks like. Okay, now why does the button just look like that? And it's still clickable. I can still click it, nothing happens. But the reason why it looks like that is because I don't have an image or text to click on. So now I'm going to put a name of that button, and now we have a regular looking button there. Okay, and also since I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the spacing. Remember, if we had a bunch of fields, if we don't have a way to make the fields go down to the next line, well, it's just going to be a bunch of fields all the way across the screen. And well, that's just not going to look good. So I recommend that you make all of these fields in paragraph tags. And this isn't a great way to do it, but it's a good way to do it now because just because we're not doing cascading style sheets yet. So now if I save and then refresh, now we have all of those input fields looking a little bit better. Okay, so I'm still going to delete, actually not all of them. Save and refresh. So now we only have 2 fields here. Okay, so back to what I was talking about. This area here, we're talking about validation. So we want to validate or check the input before it's sent to the server, before it's sent to the business website. We actually, not only do we want to put input, but we now want to put type. What type of field is it? And also look down here, you can also say it's a range, you could say it's a number, so many different types that are available, but we're only going to look at these for now. So type email. So let me go ahead and put, I'm just going to label it real quick, just the text right here, I'm just putting email, but inside of the input tag, I'm going to put type equals, type equals email. All right, so we click off of it and notice how it's different colors. We have the attribute and we're telling it that it should be an email. So now if I save and refresh, okay, now we have the text here and we have name. Okay, so I'm gonna put my name here. And just to be crazy, I'm just gonna put my name again and see what happens. Well, now we get an error. It says, please include, please include an @sign. Okay, fine, I'll put an @sign. And now I'll hit the button. Nope, please enter a part following the @sign. Okay, so let me put something after it, and now it accepted it. Of course, it's not doing anything, it just emptied the fields, but it actually doesn't have any more errors anymore. Okay, so so that was putting type email. Now let me go ahead and take that out, and I'm going to save and refresh, and let's see what happens if I don't have type. If I already did it, but I'm still going to do it again. If I just put my name on both of them instead of even thinking that it's an email and press the button and it takes it, no problem. But when you put the type, that's when it tells it has to have the @sign. It has to have something after the @sign. Okay, well, what happens if I were to do, we have type URL. So if I were to go in here and do URL, I save and then refresh. And I didn't change the title here, but it still says, so it still says email. So I'm going to put name and then I'll just put my name again. Okay, now it's asking to enter a URL. Okay, fine. There, google.com. Nope, still didn't like it. So what's wrong with that? Why do they say that that's not a URL? Well, is it because it wants that HTTP at the beginning? Yep, that was it. So when you do the type URL, it's making sure that it has the HTTP and that it looks like, and actually let me go ahead and do HTTP and let's see what happens. Oh, basically all it checks for is just the HTTP at the beginning. That's not really a URL, but you know, we do what we can. All right, so what's next? All right, so we have type URL. We're checking to make sure it has the HTTP. Type email, we're making sure it has the @ sign and something after it. Okay, and let's look at the type range. So what happens if I were to put type range? Whoops, spell it right. And I'm actually going to change the text before it too, just so it makes sense. Save and then refresh. So now it has the text range because I put that there, but now a range gives you a slider here. And that's cool because, you know, instead of actually typing a number or, you know, anything else, you can just do the range. Well, there's multiple things that you can do with the range that you see here. There's lots of attributes. And well, it makes sense because when you're creating a form, you actually want to give somebody a range. You know, if you ask somebody for a number from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 and then they type in 1,000, well, that's not what you wanted. So let's actually do that. Well, let's actually make it so that the max would be, let's say the max is 100. And of course we want quotes. And I'm actually going to change the text here. Choose 1 through 100. Okay, so the max is 100. Save and then refresh. Okay, so this is just the text that I just typed in here. And the max is 100. Okay, well, this doesn't exactly tell you that there's a difference there, that the max is 100. But you would just have to know that if somebody, the person that enters your form, if they put all the way over to the right, well, they chose 100. If they go all the way to the bottom, well, who's to say that the minimum is 1 or is it 0? So that's a good question. If you want the minimum to be 1, well, then you have to tell them. So then right here, you can do minimum equals 1. And again, it doesn't matter the order, but I'm just going to put it at the beginning because I think it makes sense. So now I have minimum equals 1. Now, if I save and refresh, again, you can't really tell that I did that. Only know that since you as the coder put the minimum as 1, if the slider is all the way at the beginning, that's 1. But also know too that there's other things that you can do. And at this point, you want to do some sort of JavaScript code to evaluate where this slider is, so that way you can put some sort of output next to it saying, okay, well, the slider is at this point 70, or the slider is 1, or the slider is 100. So that's where JavaScript comes in. Okay, and another thing you can possibly do is do the step attribute. Now the step, it tells you if it's going to go, do you want to go from the tens? Do you only want to choose 10, 20, 30, 40, 50? Or do you want to go by 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20? Or do you want to actually just count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That's the step that you choose. So if I do step, equals, let's say, 5, you're only going to be choosing in this option, within these options, you're only going to be doing something within the 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20. So let me go ahead and save and refresh. And again, you can't really tell. But you know what? Let me go ahead and change the type to number so that it makes more sense. So let me go ahead and instead of range, we're going to do number. Now if we do number and I save and refresh, the field looks different. But also notice that you actually have arrows here. So now if I'll do up, see how it started at 1, but then it stepped 5 up, 5 up, 5 up. Well, at this point, you know what? It makes sense to start at 0. So let's go ahead and change my text. And remember, this is just text, but I'm going to change the minimum to 0, save, and then refresh. So now if I were to do step up, well, now it's at 5, 10, 15, 20, and then you can do the down. Yay. And another thing too that you can do is you can actually specify where you want it to start from the very beginning. So let me go ahead and put value in there. I want to start it at 20 and then save and then refresh. And well, that didn't make sense because I was already at 20. Let me go ahead and do 60. Save. Now this is what I typed in and I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. But if I refresh, now it by default, it has 60. And then if you do the up arrow, you're stepping 5. Well, the maximum, what was the maximum? 100. We can't go any further up. We go all the way down. Can't go lower than 0 because we put the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 100. So that is your number type. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at some more. Well, let me just recap what we've looked at. We've looked at the open and close form tags. We looked at the autofocus, the placeholders. Then we have validation, where the browser checks the formatting before it's even sent to the server, which saves a lot of processing time. And then we looked at the URL validation, email. We looked at the range, the slider. And then there was a number. And now let's look at the next set of tags. There are, there's just so many more, and this chapter just doesn't give you the different options that we have. But there are some calendar options. So let's go ahead and look at that. Let me go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and delete that one because it looked complicated, and copy and then paste this one. So let's go ahead and look at a date. So this time I'm going to put input type equals date, and let's see what happens. Okay, so type equals date. I refresh, and now it actually gives you the calendar option. Of course, you can type it in, or you have the drop down for the calendar, and just hit send. Yay, pretty simple. Okay, then we also have a week option. Save and refresh. Looks a little bit different. It actually looks at the entire week. Then we also have a month option. Now notice how I'm really just changing the value of the attribute. Here's July 2021, okay. See, so this is the value and this is the attribute. Type is the attribute. Okay, let's look at the time options. So you could do type equals, let's go ahead and start on the bottom. Date time dash local. Save and then refresh. And I really just don't feel like doing all of them, to tell you the truth. So I'm just gonna do that one. Okay, that was great. And the last one I'm gonna do is just time. Okay, so I do save and refresh, and then now we have the option of putting time. And you will have to do a date and the time on the assignment. Okay. All right, so let's actually, okay, let me just kind of go back here. So those are the different options for the time and the calendar, and that's pretty much it for the chapter. But I still want to go a little bit further because I want to cover the challenges. Or actually, well, I want to cover the challenges, but let's go ahead and make sure, with the assignment. So in the assignment, we're creating a web page with the important tags listed here. You want to save, put a title using the heading tag. Now, one thing I've seen is that I know that it says heading tag and it says title, so that may be a little confusing. But always remember that the heading tags are always inside of the body. I say title, but it's really the title of the page. It's not the title tags. So if it's in a heading tag, it has to be inside the body. So I've seen where some people are putting the H1 up in the head. I don't want that. That should never be in the head. If it's in an H1, you want to see it on the body of the web page. It's not going to be in the head, because remember, the head is a hidden area, or at least it should be. I know that it still works if you put the heading 1 inside of the head. It still works, but it's not the way it should be. So please be sure to put the heading 1s inside of the body. Another thing I've noticed actually is that I've noticed that a couple of people, it might not even be this class, but I just want to make sure that you know that you don't have 2 sets of body tags. You will always only have 1 set of body tags. So one thing to think about is that when you have an HTML page, just like you have only 1 head, and then you have only 1 body. So think of it like that. You have 1 head, you have 1 body, boom, that's it. And just like that, in this assignment, again, like I said before, web pages can have multiple forms, but this assignment, you only want 1 set of form tags. If you have more, it's just not going to work out, because the button's only going to react to whatever form tag it's in. Okay, so then we want a name input box, which is what I have here. And then now actually, before I move on, okay, so then we have the table, and remember, it's just that. I want to go back to noting how, okay, we have input, and then we have type, and then date, and the name. We haven't really focused on name. Now that is something, although it's not required to have the elements on the web page, but it's required if you want to send the information somewhere. And remember, we are going to send the information within the action here. So if we're going to put an action, and really there's no purpose of having a form if you don't have some sort of action, which is, emailing the information to somebody or sending it to a database, there has to be some sort of action there, something in these quotes. So since there is, you need to have a name for each one of your fields. Okay, and this is important for the challenge part of the assignment. Okay, so, and basically it's really just a matter of input and then name, oops, name equals, I'll put username just because it's more straightforward. Oop, and I have a D. Okay, and this one, I'm gonna name it date. Name equals. Okay, so now I have names on these fields. So now you can have these fields sent to wherever. So it's very important that they do have names. Okay, so let me go ahead and move on with the assignment, and then I'll show you how those names really, how it really matters with those names. So going back to the assignment, make the cursor appear in the name input box. Then, okay, how do we remember how to do that? I'm not going to say. Okay, so how we need to create an email input box. So that means that you need to have the type for email. And then you just want another input element requesting whatever choice you want. Be sure to add a label for it. Remember, these labels here is really just text before it telling the user what they want for it in that area. Okay, this one right here, we want to add the attribute to tell the user what to enter in the box. So remember the field, you could actually say something like enter name here when the page loads. So whatever that was called, we need to have that in that one field in your third input element field. Okay, then you want to create an element that has a range with a slider and then a label, element to enter a number, and now we have minimum, just like the range, we have a max and a default value. The number has a minimum, max, and default value with a label, a date with the label, time with the label, and then a button, and we want to type with submit. So actually, I didn't cover that earlier, but for this button, we actually want to add type equals submit. Good. And really, it doesn't really make much of a difference. So if I save and refresh, there, it's still a button, but you're actually specifying that it's the submit button. Okay, and then we want to test the page, and when you click the button, it should create an email. And actually, that part needs to be under this challenge, so I need to move that. Okay, so this challenge here, I am going to pause real quick. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the challenge here. For 10 points extra credit, we want to add attributes to the form text to send the information to an email by clicking a button. And it doesn't really say it in the chapter, but if you're watching this, and of course this is recorded so you can come back and refer back to it. Okay, so to make the button create an email, the open form tag should have your email as the action. So here's the open form tag. I'm going to click in there, space, and action is going to be email. So the thing to think about here is, okay, action, email. Okay, well, I'm going to email it. So I'm going to put I'm just going to put any address at me.com. Okay, so that's an email address. But when you think about email addresses, if you really want to create an email or think about how you do an email, so let's just say we're going to put a footer area down here. I'm going to put an email address. Well, what is the code for emails? It's the anchor tag ahref equals, what do you put in the quotes? Good, mail to, good job. Good. So inside the quotes, now remember inside the anchor tags or the A tags, that's an email address, but it's really important to have mail to and then the email address, because this here in black is just text and it's just something that the user is going to click on. And I have an extra quote in there for some reason. This is just the text that somebody is going to click on, text to click. Where it is important is that the email is actually in this ahref, and it has to have mail to and then a colon and then address or at a.com. Or let me go ahead and be consistent, me.com. Okay, so just like you have an email, this is how you email somebody. Well, it has that mail to at the beginning, so you have to have that in the action as well. So we'll do mail to colon and then address at me.com. Okay, so that's the first part. It says you should have your email as the action. And it even says, think about how the email address is coded on a regular link. Okay, so that's the first part. Then to make the email include the input of the form, the method should be post. So just like we have the action in the open form tag, we want method equals post. Okay, so now let's save and then refresh and then see what happens. Okay, so I just added that link, but I'm not going to focus on that. Our focus is the fact that when we click that button, it is actually going to open up an email. So you see it working there. And my email's not open, so it's going to take a little while. And there it is. We just created a form to send the information to somebody's email. Now, this is not very common because typically it'll interact with the database, but I just wanted to show you how you can actually read those fields and then send it somewhere. So actually, notice how it says username and then date, but then there's nothing in front of it or nothing after it. Well, why is that? Well, it's because I didn't put anything in here. So let me go ahead and close that email. And let me just put a bunch of W's and then some time, or yeah, it's a time and a half date. Okay, I just put some time and then hit the button. Now we're creating an email again, and there it is. Whatever username has a bunch of W's, the date has, whatever the date is formatted with. Now, I want to note that this is the time because it has time here. So if I were to put date here, it is consistent with what it actually says. And also notice, remember I said username? I put username here, so that's why it says username equals something, date equals something. So let me go ahead and save and refresh, and you'll see that it looks a bit more consistent. So now here's a name. This is my name. And then we'll put a date. Click the button. Now we're going to create an email. Now it actually says whatever was in the username, that first field, and then the date. Good. And then the user would just hit send, and then it'll send it to that address. So that pretty much makes sense, right? Pretty straightforward. So let's actually, one thing also that I wanted to cover was more fields that are available to you. Okay, so one thing I also wanted to show you is a website that we'll be going to in the future, because we'll be going through chapters all the way up to chapter 22, but then the last 3 weeks of this course, let me just go ahead and I don't know if it matters, but if I go down into the modules and all the way at the very end, it will be weeks 14, 15, and 16. Basically, 14 and 15 will be doing JavaScript, and it is actually a bit more challenging. I'm not sure if you've taken any programming languages, but it would be the parts that are much more similar to programming, which would be the most difficult part of this, this class. And then week 16 will be an exam on the JavaScript, and that's it. It's not a cumulative exam. It's just going to be based on the JavaScript chapters. Okay, so there. So for those last weeks, we are actually going to be looking at this webpage here, W3 Schools. Very nice page because it gives you so much information on creating just so much, not only just HTML, but CSS. I mean, if you just look at the list right here, there's just so many things that you can learn. There's even Python, Java, C++, C#, and all that. So we will be referring back to this page here in the future, but when it comes to JavaScript, and I won't go into that, what I want to go into is the HTML part. And you'll see that, you know, just all these different areas here. As more information, we just covered tables. You know, maybe if you were having difficulty with the tables, and my video doesn't help, maybe you can refer back to this page. It talks about, you know, the table tag, TRs, THs, TDs, and here's a, you know, a table. And what's really cool about this site is you can actually try things yourself. So you could actually do code on one side and then process it on the other. So if you just change it here and then hit run on top, it actually makes the change there. So I think it's really cool. It's a good way to practice, I think. Okay, you know, we have lists. We've already discussed how to do unordered lists, ordered lists, and here's JavaScript. But what I wanted to look at was forms. So if you click on the HTML forms link, you know, it discusses, you know, what I just discussed. You know, here's the input fields, there's a button, we have your form tags, so open form, close form. There's different types, and remember I said that there was so many different ones, but we didn't cover all of them. You know, we did cover type equals, well, we actually didn't even put type equals text, we just had input, but that would be good to put type equals text. We had input type, we can have a button, we can have submit, but either way, either of them will submit the form information. But a couple of them that we didn't cover was radio buttons, which is basically like the multiple choice questions that you get on your quiz. It has radio buttons or circles, so that way you only choose one. So you'll have a list of radio buttons, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then of course there's check boxes where on your exams you have multiple answers. You can have, you know, 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on what the answer would be. So again, text fields, you know, we already discussed the different types. This is the label tag. I mentioned on the assignment to put labels. Let me go ahead and go back to Lab 5. Did I say tables? I meant labels. So you'll have a name input box and you'll have a label right before it. Now on on my page that I created, you can just put name and then colon. That's fine. But there is actual label tags for, you know, whatever. And, you know, it is important to have some like this too, because remember with cascading style sheets, you can actually format labels, you know, just by changing a little bit of code instead of going through each one of those labels and making a change. So that's why it's a good idea to do this, but it's not required for the assignment because it wasn't in the chapter. Here's a little bit more about the label. Here's radio buttons. Remember, I mentioned that you can have like a multiple choice. Here is the, here's a sample of it, just like multiple choice. You can choose either of these. And again, you can try it yourself. So we have type equals radio, and then we have a label. So here is a circle. These are the radio input types, and then it just has a label afterward. And notice how I can only have one at a time. I can't choose multiple answers. That would be checkboxes. So if you look at checkboxes, we have those squares instead. So you can actually choose more than one. And that is just a matter of doing input type checkbox. And then of course there's a label, and then input type checkbox again, and then your label. So yeah, so lots of cool stuff that you can do with web pages. And you know, it's not in the text, but it is available. Remember action, you know, where you want the information to be sent. Well, we created a mail to, and we put our email address here. But this right here is a page. It is being sent to a page, or really PHP. PHP is a another programming language that's commonly used with web pages to, you know, process fields. So there's a PHP page that actually will accept these names and process them on the server. So, and also notice how it's just a slash and then a page. Does anybody remember what that's called? Like what type of link is that? Do you remember what type of link that is? And it doesn't say it here, so that's not cheating. Well, there's different types. Remember, there's a relative link and then an absolute. Now, the thing to remember about a relative is that the relative does not have the entire address. So it doesn't have http://www. So this is a relative. If it was an absolute, then it would have .http:// and all that stuff. So this is a relative link. Okay, let's see. Okay, so let's see. And then of course, there's just some more exercises that we can, that you can practice with, a bunch of elements, you know, so many different types of things that you can do. So yeah, just kind of be familiar with this page, and remember that you can come to this page and kind of practice and learn more, because you know, the more you know, the better you are at it, and the more practice you get, the easier things are. So yeah, that is pretty much it, all that I wanted to show you. But just remember, all of these things that are in the assignment will be found in your textbook, except for this challenge here. But I just showed you how to do that. And remember too that this challenge, the second challenge, is really just creating CSS to align and make it look good, but you don't have to do that. That's a challenge, and we haven't even covered CSS, and I know that some of you know how to do that. But also remember too, is that even if you want something to look good, I need you to make sure that you meet the requirements on the rubric, because I know that things can be fun and you're just kind of, trying all these different things, but please be sure to make sure that you meet the requirements, because, sometimes you make such beautiful pages, but I can't give you full credit because the requirements aren't fulfilled. Okay, so that's lab 5. And then of course, what's also due is the next quiz, which is about forms again. And that would be it for the week.